you can see that the fire in the smoke is super bright at the kind of bottom where it's hottest, and then as it sort of leaves and gets further away from the center, it gets darker. Normally what would happen is you would start with the red and get lighter as you go to the points where the light kind of hits the model. So yeah, when you're working with these fire or explosions, it does kind of work in reverse order, but it still can create a really cool effect by using the airbrush. I'm super excited today to have the opportunity to paint again with you guys. Now, I really wanted to do something that was a little bit different. It involves some miniature painting, but I think this technique could be used across many different things. So we're going to be looking at how to paint fire. We could do some OSL glows, we could do some pre-highlights, some Zenithal highlights, and ultimately, kind of in a way, paint in reverse. We're going to start off with some super bright, super vibrant colors, and then work down to more darker tones. And what we want to try to recreate is these kind of explosions, special effects, or, you know, painting lava or terrain, tables, you name it. There's lots of different sort of techniques that you could use this for. I've recently just completed a lava sort of table as well, which looks super awesome. But I thought, what a great opportunity to share that with you and how I utilize the airbrush to do that with some pretty simple techniques. And more importantly, it's just loads of fun. So we could do some special effects. All I've done to begin with is just give the miniatures that we're going to focus on today a black prime. We've showed you how to do that in the past. It's super simple. Now I've chosen to go with the evolution. I've got the small cup on because I don't really think that I need a much larger cup for this project. And also I've got the 0.2 needle inside. Again, I want to be quite detailed at certain stages, and I've just got enough pullback on the trigger to make sure that I can do any of those larger areas. So yeah, I think the 0.2 smaller cup will be perfect for this. It also means I'm not going to overload the cup and waste any paint that I don't need for this project. And it's time to start with that first color, which is going to be that Zenithal highlight to really help us sculpt in shade where all our highlights are going to essentially go. To kick this off, I'm going to use Tamiya Flat White. I love this paint just to basically get down that sort of pre-highlight. We're going to be using the Tamiya X20A, and we're going to be doing about 2:1 ratio of thinner to paint because the paint isn't pre-thinned. So we're going to make sure we put a good amount of thinner in, and just put my brush in there, making sure this is going to come out to kind of that sort of texture that we're sort of looking for, that we've gone over again in multiple other videos. And do check out some of those great videos that Warwick's done on how to actually correctly thin your paints. So we've loaded up the evolution, and we should hopefully, yeah, look at that, beautiful. We can create some nice lines on just using the base there as a practice. Okay, so we're going to kick off first of all with this kind of lava spurting out of the ground. When we're looking at this, if we kind of look at this special effect that I've done before, you can see that the fire in the smoke is super bright at the kind of bottom where it's hottest, and then as it sort of leaves and gets further away from the center, it gets darker and much kind of warmer in color in terms of those reds and dark reds, browns and blacks. So we're going to kick this off first of all. We're just getting the highlights down onto the rock formations, okay? I'm just working from the top here, and then this is just going to get down a little bit of nice colors then for me to layer on with those grays as we hit that to give it sort of that rock formation color. Now we're going to hit the bottom part of this sort of lava and fire with quite a lot of this kind of flat white, because this is where our first color is going to go with that yellow. And then in a strange way, we're actually going to work in a reverse way. We're going to turn this upside down. And normally I would Zenithal highlight from the top where the light catches, but in this case the light is actually going to be coming from the bottom. So we're doing this in completely the reverse order, which is super interesting to talk about and actually experiment with painting. Really focusing on the middle part and then leaving the top bit black. So if we look at this from the kind of top down camera, you can see it pretty much looks black. But then as we start to tip it, you can see there's a lot more sort of color gradients to that now, or shade should I say. And that is what we need to then start to fill with the yellows and the oranges and the reds. Now I want to give that one more pass because I really want those reds to come out, and I want those yellows to be super vibrant as well. Happy with that? It's now time to move on to the Magmadroth. So the Magmadroth if we look at the box art, we've got the kind of fins that are super bright, and then under the belly, really bright as well, especially out of the mouth. We've got loads of those bright colours, so we kind of want to replicate that using this sort of stage. So just sort of getting into the mouth area, I want to make sure we've got loads of that kind of potential yellows for later on. So I'm going to hit that really well, and multiple coats so that white has a chance to build up, and that yellow is going to go on so nicely. Okay, then we sort of said about the belly as well, so let's start to get that belly nice and yellow as well. So to do that, this white colour is going to be perfect for that same colour. Now he's got these kind of, on his belly, he's got these little muscles that look like would be super hot, so I'm going to really make sure they're super bright, because this is where maybe some of that sort of fire is getting out, or I don't know, some sort of vent he's got on his body. So yeah, making sure that his belly and his bottom of his tail is really bright, going to a much darker colour as it goes round. Okay, so hitting this back with that white again, down the neck area, because that would be kind of where most of that flame would be coming out of. So again, I thought that'd be nice and bright. And the great thing is about these sort of mythical creatures is you can go really crazy with your color schemes, which is a really nice place to be when you're trying to experiment with different sort of painting techniques, compared to if you were trying to paint something ultra realistic. I think the Age of Sigmar range is brilliant for that. So now hitting the fins, and just mostly focusing on the bottom part, and the top of the fins would get a little bit darker, so that's what we're going to try and replicate. And I'm just trying to put this white in between the fin, so it leaves like a bit of a gap either side, which is going to be a little bit darker. So sometimes working in a little bit closer there really create some nice hot spots for that paint to catch, because we know that's where that yellow really wants to sit and take. And it looks like a lot of this other stuff is kind of a sort of darker colour, black for the claws, and then obviously a sort of red tone for the scales. So I do want the red to take. Now it's not going to do that particularly well over the black, so I'm just going to give this a very light pass, just so I know then the red will take to the black. So we do want some coverage, but nice and thin, because we want to make sure that the fins are much brighter, so we can really go super vibrant with those yellows and oranges. And then the red will take to this, but it will just be a bit darker. And then the palms of the feet, again, they're quite dark, but we'll just give it a little bit of colour or pre-highlight in case we need it. And we can always darken it down if we need to. But there we go, that's looking pretty good so far. Now before we move on to the next colour, we're just going to give the airbrush a good clean. So we've got some Vallejo cleaner here. Make sure to pulse as you clean that through, and just remove any paint from the front just to avoid any sort of tip dry. So the colours we're going to be using today, we've got the Vallejo Air Paint range, and we've got just a classic black, we've then got an ocean grey, we've got a cold grey, just in case I can't quite decide which grey I prefer for when we come to paint some of the stone. We've got a nice bright sun yellow, we've got a orange fire, we've got a bloody red, and we've also got a gory red as well, and we've obviously got using that Tamiya flat white for some of those Zenithal highlights. So these are some of the colours that I'm using. You could use whatever you wanted, but you want a sort of dark red, a lighter red, a medium orange, and then a super nice bright yellow. And then some greys and blacks to, you know, if you're doing any sort of rock formations, which we're going to be doing with this. And of course, that Tamiya flat white for that Zenithal highlight. But again, you could use any other that you are happy with, and you most importantly know how to thin it down and get it to a great consistency. These are great paints, they're already pre-thinned, so obviously it's super easy just to do that 1-to-1 ratio. And as Warwick always says, make sure you try to use a 1-to-1 ratio of the thinner that you're going to use with the same brand of paint. Okay, now let's go on and do some painting. So I want to focus on the rocks first of all. Now I've put in some thinner already. I'm just going to put in a couple of drops of black, and then most importantly this grey colour. It's kind of the cold grey from the Game Air range, but I do quite like the tones of this one. So a few drops of that, and then we're going to mix all that together because I want to be able to come back in and lighten this up a little bit. So I didn't want quite as light colour as this cold grey, which is why that kind of black helps bring that colour down a little bit. Right, there we go, that's nice. Okay, so all we're doing is going all over this area of the rocks. Now, most of this colour is later on is going to be looking really bright from the kind of lava and all the smoke coming out of the ground. So we're not worried too much about being super detailed with this, but what's great about this is that it's just a nice base colour of grey, then we can go back in and lighten up certain areas as well. So just getting a good grey coverage all the way over. So what you now want to be doing is we just want to basically lighten this up slightly. You could do this in a couple of ways. You could hit it with an airbrush, or you could hit it with a quick dry brush. And the great thing is about this, because we already sort of darkened down the grey slightly, when we go back in with just the normal colour, it's actually going to be essentially a bit of a highlight. So that's great, because it's just going to make this job super easy, and I don't want to spend too much time doing this, so we're going to basically get a bit of a dry brush on the go. Alright, and I've just already got a dry brush palette, done it in matte black so I can see how the colour comes out, and again I'm just going to sort of roughly go over all the rock formations here with that slightly now lighter grey, which is straight out of the pot. Okay. There we go. They've started to pick out some of those details and some of the edges of the rocks because of the dry brush. Gives it a little bit extra texture. And really we're going to be letting the airbrush do a lot of the work shortly on. You probably could go one further, add a little bit of white to that, which you could. And again, you'd be able to take that to one sort of next level higher as well. So get a little bit of white on there. Mix that in here with the grey. And now we've got an even lighter grey as well. And if we go back over again, that'll really start to pick out kind of some of those details, which could be really nice for when we do the OSL glow. So let's see what this kind of looks like. And that looks pretty good, so pretty happy with that. Okay, now it's time to have the fun bit, and that is to get the airbrush on the go with those yellows. What we're going to be doing now is hitting this from the very bottom part, okay? And actually, I'm going to probably cover a lot of the model in this yellow because we can darken it down later on as we go. So we want to be hitting all the areas that we did with the white earlier. Now, this is going to take a couple of coats, depending on how much of that Zenithal highlight you put down. So as you can see on here, the yellow takes a lot easier to the white areas, and where it is more grey, where the pass was lighter, it kind of looks like a very dark sort of green colour, which is okay because we're going to hit that with the orange and the reds. But that's what we're kind of looking for, and again you can sort of apply this quite aggressively, just sort of drying that down a little bit, and we're going to need a couple of coats for this. Don't worry if you get overspray onto the rock area, because it's going to make it start to look like that light is creeping over the rocks, and it's going to really sell that effect. Now it's dry, we're going to hit that with another pass in the bottom area where we know we want it super nice and yellow at the bottom part of this. Now it's dry. Now I mentioned the word OSL earlier. Essentially means object light sourcing. So the object is here, and it's creating this source of light, which is then essentially, or you could use the term glow if that helps. But yeah, OSL is a kind of technique that you might stumble across in the miniature painting kind of world a little bit more often. So yeah, that's kind of what we call by that OSL, where it starts to glow onto other areas than the point that you're trying to paint. Now we've done the yellow, we have a little bit left in our cup. I'm not really too worried about washing that out because we're going to move straight onto our orange. And what this actually creates is, just by adding a little bit of orange into the mix that we've already got, it's going to start to create a gradient. So we can go from yellow to yellowy orange to orangey red, and so on and so forth. So it starts to create transitions in your colours, and that will start to deepen the colour slightly. And also, it just means that you're not jumping from massive areas or the need to buy too many different colours. Now we're going to hit a larger portion of this colour now. And this is going to blend the orange and the yellow in really, really well because it is that kind of 50-50 mix of yellow and orange. Now this is certainly one of those things that you do have to trust the process. Make sure you apply that next layer down after the first one's dried. I'm not going over this sort of center part. I'm kind of looking at this as 4 different areas. I know I want it to be super yellow, yellowy orange, into orange, orangey red, then red, and then finally into like a dark red or black. So this bit is yellow, we're going to leave that alone, and we're just going to create a sort of line where we want that orange to start to come in. I'm happy with that, and now it's time just to give it a full coverage of orange. We're now going over the areas we've just done, but leaving a bit of a gap between where we know the yellow meets that orange-yellow mix. Now, in regards to the glow on the rocks, we kept it nice and tight with the yellow near the center. But as we work up, then obviously the light is going to project out further. So we're now going to hit this with that orange color around the area that we did with the yellow. Widening in the color base. But as we do so, we're working further away, so then the color isn't quite as intense. Now with the orange done, that's just drying, so what we're going to do is start to load up the red. Okay, so where we're going to apply this red, we know we want it yellow, we want it yellowy orange, we want it orange. Now we want this red to come in at the very top, because we know the top part and the very top areas are going to be a real dark red into even black. So we're going to hit this area here, and as we get close to that point where the two colors meet, we're going to work further away and slightly sporadically, so it just is a nice sort of gradient rather than an intense color. Whereas at the top we want it to be a lot more red, so we can work a little bit closer, a lot more control there. And again, that kind of glow on the bottom will just kind of hit these areas right around the edges. So the red's going to take pretty well to the orange areas, and it's going to be a little bit more vibrant. But then when it's going over that black color, because we didn't obviously put that Zenithal highlight on and the color's very transparent, it just gives that sort of black smoke effect a little bit of a warmer tone, but without taking too much to it. But we do want to hit this again from this sort of bottom area where we know it wants to be red. Now finally, the last thing I do just to sell the effect is we're going to give this a little bit of a black smoke on certain areas. So just get that mixed in. You can use the bubble back technique. Okay, now we're just going to work in reverse order here with this black. Earlier we did the Zenithal highlight from below. We're actually going to use the black color from the tops, and where the smoke really starts to work further away from the model, that's where we're going to apply kind of the black paint. And again, it's nice and transparent, it's not too thick, so it is just going to give it more of a darker sort of black smoke area to those bits that start to come away from the center part. And hitting this just from the top all the way over just adds a little bit of extra details and starts to tie in the whole model together. And there we have it. Really, really happy with that. We've got some nice yellows, some oranges, and also those kind of black smoke areas as well. And that looks pretty good. And we've kind of got the really cool glow over the rocks, and that looks pretty awesome. It's super fun to do. A great way to experiment, sort of changing up colors. Again, you could hit this with more reds if you wanted. You go a little bit lighter with the yellows. You've got loads of different options. So yeah, give it a try and let me know what you think if you were doing something like this. So it's time to paint the Magmadroth, and the first color we're going to go with is the yellow. And we're going to put a little bit of thinner in, a couple of drops of that, and then a few drops of yellow. Now with the yellow areas, it's going to take a few coats to build up, but we basically want to go over those areas we did which were super bright. Okay, so we really want to hit those kind of hot spot areas with this yellow, and it will take really well to the places where the white is brightest. You can go all over the model with this. You don't need to be too careful with it, because actually the yellow then will start to pre-highlight where we're going to put the orange. into the mouth and the face. On the belly. Again on the fins. Underside of the tail. And I've kept him off the base because it's much easier to paint when we know we need to do so many details underneath him in a colour. Okay, with that first layer down, it's looking pretty good, but I think we just want to give that one more pass just to make sure those yellows are super bright, super saturated. You'll notice when you put down that second and third layer, that vibrancy and saturation really starts to come through, and you really start to get that kind of true colour that you're after. Sometimes the first pass it can still look a little bit murky or a little bit too dark, so yeah, that second and third coverage really starts to get a much nicer vibrancy to your colours. Working a few fingers away here, and not being too careful either with where I'm applying this paint, because I know that it's just going to help add extra layers of colour to then when we start putting down the orange and the reds. Okay, time to apply the orange. And we just want to kind of be really careful where we're applying this. We want to keep majority of that yellow colour. So what I'm doing is working on the fins, but in between the areas that are yellow and then darker. So we're kind of working around, drawing around those yellow areas to make sure the rest of that model has that kind of coverage, in working just on the top areas, so we're keeping that center part as yellow. Now for the rest of the scales, we want to give this a full coverage of this orange color. And this probably will need a couple of coats. And because we gave it that Zenithal earlier, it is taking slightly easier than if we were to put this straight over a black. Again, being careful on the scales, going in between the yellow areas. So we're leaving the yellow area, and where we're just lightly, where the yellow meets kind of that darker color, we're just applying a little bit of that transparent orange over it, and that will just kind of blend the two colors together and help sell that merger of colors. It also means you don't have to be too neat with this, which is also great. Especially if you're more of a beginner airbrusher, it just means that, you know, you can still get great results whilst practicing your control and your trigger technique. So after a couple more layers of that orange going over in those exact same places, it's now time to add the red. And I'm going to go straight to this gory red, a nice, rich, darker red colour. So there's a good bit of difference between the orange and also the red colours. So again, that kind of 50-50 ratio that we're kind of aiming for. Give this a bit of a test. A little bit of that orange coming through. There we go. Now we've got red. And we can see on here, we've got red, really dark red scales, and then it goes into red into the body before the orange meets the yellow. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to cover all this in red now, but just leaving those bits of areas where we want it to leave a little bit of that orange before it gets to yellow. And again, being super careful as we work in and around. I'm just working on the top bits here of these sort of fins, and then in between the areas where we'd probably paint those with a black, the black kind of, I suppose, bone areas of the fins. Working into a darker black tone. The top parts of this super dark red. Working on the top bits of those fin areas. in between the spikes. And a good guide for this is anywhere where you kind of end up with like a mustard colour. That's exactly what you want to be either hitting with that orange or a red, because it's that kind of in-between stage. And working from the tops for the red, leaving it to go to orange and then yellow as you get closer to the centre of the body. And again, following the similar shapes of the model with the airbrush, letting the light in colour fall as we go down, and then it's going to blend into the orange and the yellow. And then as we turn him over, we've got a nice change in colours from yellowy, orange, right the way to red, keeping those fins nice and yellow as well. And already, that's looking pretty good. And that's just kind of one coat, maybe two coats of red, and we could make this even darker right down the centre if we wanted. And if we do look on the box, there is like a nice sort of line there of really, really dark red. And to kind of apply that, if you wanted to go to one next stage further, a couple of drops of black in with the red and mix that in together. And we just need to make sure when you do apply black, it can go quite dark quite quickly. There we go. So now we've got a little bit of that colour coming through. We're just going to very carefully imagine we're painting about 2 of the scales in this sort of darker red colour. 2 passes of that. In the second pass, we're going to get even tighter and maybe work on just painting the top scale in this kind of darker red black colour. Now, final stage here, and I've got a Army Painter Warp Paints Fanatic paint, and it's the Inner Light. And this, I want to just see if this works. Not really sure yet. We're going to experiment together. So we're going to get our dry brush. We're going to take most of the moisture out of it. And what we want to recreate is these scales have kind of like a really nice kind of edge highlight to them. And even on the darkest areas, they kind of edge highlighted with a yellow colour. So I've got a nice thicker yellow colour because sometimes the air paints don't quite dry brush as well, I find, because of the texture of them. So we're getting off most of that moisture out of the bristles. And we don't want it too dry, but there we go. Just make sure that yellow's in all the bristles. And we want to get most of the paint off this brush. So we're going to really work it into the bristles. We're going to be a little bit heavier handed on the bottom areas, which we know are yellow. And the great thing about that is those areas will really start to take off any of the paint that might be left on those bristles. Around that mouth area, add a little bit of that dry brush to it. And then what we're going to now slowly do is work against the areas in which the scales are facing. So we're going to work up the model. And what that's hopefully going to do is just pick out some of those sort of scales. Now this is a much faster way than trying to potentially edge highlight all of the scales individually. Okay, and there we have it. Quick dry brush. You know, this is an additional step you don't have to do because I think it looked great just after using the airbrush, but if you want to add some extra details to it, then it just helps maybe blend some of those colours in together as well. And again, if you wanted it more vibrant, you could keep hitting it with those red colours, maybe some more layers of orange, but I think just to give you those concepts of actually working in reverse order with the yellow into the orange into the red, because normally what would happen is you would start with the red and get lighter as you go to the points where the light kind of hits the model. So yeah, when you're working with these fire or explosions, it does kind of work in reverse order, but it still can create a really cool effect by using the airbrush. So anyway, I really hope this was a helpful video for you. Go out there, paint some fantasy models, some explosions, some lava, some fire, whatever it is, go and have some fun with it. I know I certainly did, and it's a great way of improving your skills in terms of blending those colours together. Anyway, see you on another video.